Warm welcome to the go-getters that are rejoining the session after our technical glitch last time. As you know, the topic for today is the evolution of regulatory operation of the regulatory operations organization. And we are super thrilled to have two famous guests with us today on this topic, Steve Jens and Priya Becek. Practical thing first, this is live. There's a chat, so please don't hesitate to raise any questions that you have in the chat. We will try our best to fit them in our Q&A session at the end of this event. But before we go there, and before I fire my first question at Steve and Priya, a quick introduction on the both of them. Steve, as said, super happy that he's with us today. He's a veteran in life sciences with over 30 years of experience. He is the managing partner of Steve Jens Associates Incorporated, a benchmarking and advisory firm specializing in performance management, strategy, regulatory information management, and organizational transition. He spent his early career at Johnson & Johnson before moving into consulting. He led global life sciences consulting practices for First Consulting Group and Booz Allen Hamilton. Jens and Associates is most known for their insightful industry benchmarks, world-class RIM industry performance standard, and thought leadership. Steve holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, in Business Computer Science, and a Master in Organizational Development. But if you thought Steve had some experience, Priya, she's no rookie either. Her career spans over 25 years across life sciences, chemical, and fast-moving consumer industry. She has led several regulatory and R&D programs across the entire product life cycle for various therapeutic areas and product platforms. Based on her extensive operational and strategic knowledge in regulatory affairs, Priya brings relevant industry insights to help teams level up. Her leadership, creativity, and teams-focused approach has resulted in increased speed and compliance. Priya holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry with Management Studies and a Master's in Environmental Strategy. So with these beautiful words, Steve, I'm going to fire my first question at you. The title gives it all away. How do you see the regulatory operations organization evolving in the near and in the longer term?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having both Priya and myself on this LinkedIn Live. So it's a great forum, and that's a big question, and it's something we've been tracking in our world-class RIM surveys, over the last 3 cycles. And for our audience that hasn't participated, we do this very large regulatory study, every 2 years. It's always in the spring. So our latest one was in Q2 of this year. So both Priya and I and 3 other great colleagues are members of the core research team. So the reason why we started tracking this is really through our conversations with our clients. There's always the question of what's next, what are we focusing on? And certainly the reason why people take our benchmarks is what's everybody else doing? Now, what everybody else doing kind of really differs, as far as if you're a large multinational, a mid-tier, and a smaller, and a very small. So it's been interesting for us because if we go back about 20 years ago, so I'm dating myself, with the ECTD, that actually changed the concept of regulatory operations where we have regional hubs. So there was a whole structural change. And then it's been kind of static, I would say, for about 15 years. Now we see some changes going on. So certainly in the near term, and I'm not sure if we're going to show, one of the data graphs today or not. The one thing, especially for the larger and mid-tier companies, is, thank you very much. So it's one of our study graphs that has come in from our spring study. The end number was 63 companies, and a nice balance of large, mid-tier, small, and very small. And for people like the data graphs, the color coding here is if you see the dark green that says that's part of the regulatory operations focus. But in the light blue and the light green, that's where the question is, are you going to be expanding kind of the structure or the remit? Or are you going to be pulling it back? Or we're thinking about it, but we're going to do it in future years. So I'm not going to go through the stuff on the left. Is all the classic RegOps stuff, the publishing, submission, managers, regulatory systems. The thing you notice on the far left is almost everybody, and it doesn't matter if you're small, mid-tier, or large, has regulatory data management. We hear this kind of data from documents. So those are the two things, more focused on data, kind of near term, and where the first box with the red dots is business excellence. Some companies call it continuous improvement. So that's an area that has picked up substantially, where there's more maturity and focus on business metrics, kind of the volume of metrics, all the submission volume that's coming out for resource planning, cycle time metrics for process work, and then something that's near and dear both to Priya and I is quality metrics, especially around the data quality. So I would say, kind of in the near term, it's this big focus on, in addition to the classic responsibilities, business metrics, that business operations, continuous improvement. Now, some things, even though this is a chart of all the companies, for the larger companies, we see them have a greater percentage of business excellence because they're trying to fight complexity. So when you're fighting complexity, having a specific organizational strategy to focus on continuous improvement. But the other thing too, we always get questions, well, how about CTA operations? And what we find is that the larger mid-tier companies more will have kind of that formal CTA operations in the RegOps, remit. So I could go on and on about this, but I think that the headline is there is some small structural change, but there's a lot more around remit and roles, which I think we'll both talk about that.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. Maybe all of that said, Priya, how do you see like the roles and remits within regulatory operations? How do you see those evolving?
Yes, thank you, good. So thanks for having us here today with DocShifter, first of all. We always enjoy these conversations, and, I think we could talk about this topic for a long, long time. I think, based on what Steve has just shown on the screen, it's useful, right? Because you can see the 11 or 12 remit areas of RegOps based on what our data shows from the study that we've done. And it's the same categories along the bottom there. You can see, some of the initiatives and so on. But what I want to just talk about is that the evolution has been quite remarkable. Steve mentioned ECTD as an introduction. And really, back then, the classic RegOps organization was publishing, submission management, perhaps working with translation vendors, things like this. And then it evolved into let's give RegOps some more things to do. It felt like the obvious place to put things like training, document management, sometimes document review and QC. So looking at hyperlinks, QC of documents against source documents, things like this. Reg intelligence, you can see that here on the back end of the graph. Also things like, looking at process, looking at standard operating procedure management, things like this. And also what we see appearing is compliance reporting. So, RegOps often is working in this space where they're using different dashboards of RIM solutions to provide reporting, and reporting on KPIs and metrics and things like that. So you can see some of those items along the bottom here on the graph. And now what we see with organizations is that they're further evolving into that space where they're looking at data governance, data quality. Some RegOps teams are even rebranding themselves actually, to, data quality and governance or data quality and compliance. We see that happening in some of the teams we're working with now. So they're not classically regulatory operations. Their remit is shown through the branding or the naming of their function. And here, you know, they're looking at things like vendor management, perhaps a little bit more on, you know, looking at digital strategy, working with their enterprise level counterparts to look at the overall R&D digital strategy and how does regulatory's digital strategy fit into that. As a regulatory function, we, you know, touch on many different systems that we use to inform our product changes, product maintenance, and also product introduction. So it really makes sense for regulatory to be part of this strategy. And you know what we're also seeing is medical writing coming under the wings of regulatory operations as well. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to add any more to the remit, and then I'll move on to the skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up the medical writing, because the other thing is, even though we had those categories on the previous slide about the remit, we always say, well, what else is in your remit? And the other thing besides the medical writing, if memory serves me correct, about 20% of the companies said labeling, you know, or at least the label operations aspect. So so if you think about it, you know, operations is operations, if it's, you know, for submissions, labeling, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's for the audience, you know, the two big things. We're seeing more and more labeling and, like Priya said, medical writing. And I also do want to comment on the digital strategy, even though we're going to be looking and I think the you know, another slide we're going to be sharing with you is that, you know, we're all caught up in this hype of, you know, AI. So it's the latest shiny object. It has its role. We'll talk about generative AI, that subset, in a little bit. But a lot of times people think digital strategy and they think of IT. And I know, Priya, we've talked a lot about the framework that was developed.
Yeah.
Where, you know, you have your technology assets and, you know, just all the brilliant people in IT are really focused on which vendors and niche vendors and the Gartner report, you know, those types of things. But the bigger foundational work is the data assets, you know, the data standards, you know, all the work we do on data governance. We had some really interesting data about skills and regulatory to support a digital future and data governance. And finally, the KPIs and standard processes, because if you don't have a standard process, it's a waste of technology. So those are like 3 out of the 4 pillars business owns, you know, on the regulatory digital strategy. And for the successful companies, it's aligned to the R&D, you know, digital strategies too. But yeah, but I know there's a lot to say about roles there, you know, Priya, besides just the remit, which is structure, right?
Indeed, yes. So let me pin some of that down, you know, for the audience, and appreciating that, you know, our audience that here today will be of mixed experience, right? So let's talk about this. So first of all, you know, let's draw our attention to this graph here. This graph shows where companies are working on strategic initiatives, right, within regulatory. And the focus here is on the light blue and the green. You can see there's not much dark green where companies have completed work in these areas, apart from that 50% mark for global RIM adoption. You know, there are still many companies that are adopting RIM for the first time, or they're on a RIM modernization journey. But otherwise, across the board, a lot of the light blue, meaning companies are working in this area to build their you know, initiatives in these areas. And it's very important to link this to the roles that are evolving and the skills that people need nowadays in regulatory operations, if we can use that word generally. And I think, you know, for me, having worked in RegOps myself and actually evolved regulatory operations departments myself with other teams and companies and really upskilling these folks, it's really apparent that the skills evolution is really high. You know, where you may have been as a RegOps person doing a lot of paper management, a lot of submission management documents, electronic documents, and so on, where you're really getting that submission out the door, that's now your bread and butter, right? You need to be detail orientated there and have good line of sight for deadlines and things like this. But I think where the evolution of roles and skills is really happening is in being able to be visible, you're going to be asked as a RegOps department for progress. Where are we? What's happening? How can we make that visible? So use of dashboards in our RIM systems, being able to report on the correct milestones at the correct metrics on volume, what's upcoming, the pipeline, really planning. So that requires a lot of kind of project management style skills, right? So that's really important. People want to see what's the critical path for different submissions. And I think having these dashboards, you can see here in the middle, real-time dashboards means that it's actionable. So actually a RegOps department is more open to being held accountable and on point for so many different measurements. I think that's really, important to mention here in terms of being visible. In previous lives, in my, work, when I've been working with publishers and submission managers, they very much were like a back office. Now they're no longer that. They're very much in the center and heart of a regulatory process. Just a couple more things to add. Things that I think it's important to know about clear handoffs. Because you now have so many remit areas for a RegOps department, there's going to be lots of handoffs, information exchange, and I think that points the spotlight to cross-functional collaboration. You can no longer be the back office person who might be shy or reserved. You're just working with the regulatory leader maybe. Now, as a RegOps person, as a submission manager or a data scientist, you're having to work across functions and collaborate with people in safety, supply, medical, and so on. So I think there's a skill set that's required there to do that in terms of, business acumen, being able to explain things in a way that everyone understands. And I think the last thing I want to say is about partnering. We're working with a lot of clients at the moment where they want their RegOps team or operational excellence team, for example, to be a partner to the outside stakeholders, to the stakeholders around them. So not just regulatory affairs, but these other functions as well. So with all of those things, there's a real need to upskill people, and companies shouldn't forget that if they're currently working on a technology solution, they should think about their people and their operating model at the same time, to not keep leave the people behind and have lots of nice systems, but the people aren't skilled enough to meet that expectation. So back to you, Steve, and Kurt, if you want to address the next question. Thank you.
Yeah, just I think one more comment on the slide, then we'll turn it back over for I think our next or final question. The time really goes quick. So the people that are looking at this graph, like if you look at, as Priya said, the light blue is, hey, we're working on it. The light green is, we plan to work on it in the next 2 years. So if you add those together, that's where that star is, the red star. So there's 6 of those. And our stuff's so detailed, it's hard on the eyes for a presentation like this. But let me read off the 6, because I think it really amplifies the discussion that Priya just had about roles. This is not your classic RegOps. So improve data quality, regulatory systems, RIM system, business process simplification. Everybody's working on that. But the next 4, formalizing data governance for regulatory information, massive push. So, and that's one of the highest upskilling areas, like how do we upskill so we're better at data governance, the concepts of data stewardship. Is it a job or is it a role? The next one's improving global dossier, because it's the secondary markets that are getting all the attention on these big modernization business cases. So even the dossier manager role is changing into a very strategic global dossier, thinking about and partnering with the GRLs to faster time to submission in the secondary markets. Then the final 2 are advanced automation capabilities, and that's one of, again, everybody's trying to upskill there, both on the business side and IT side. And finally, one that's always been around, near and dear to our hearts, is the e-labeling or electronic, product information, initiative. So again, it's just not about submissions and publishing. These are big strategic initiatives that RegOps RegOps is taking the lead and having the leadership. So there's a lot of different skills required, which is exciting. It's a really exciting time. So Gert, back to you. I think we said enough here. To talk all day on some of this stuff.
This is live. This is live, so I should have unmuted. Thank you, Stephen and Priya. For the people that joined just slightly later, you're welcome to ask questions on the LinkedIn post. You can comment, and we're going to try pick up any questions that you might have. So please don't be shy and ask the questions that you might have. Steve, you shared some great data, some very complex slides, some eye tests, at least for me. Some great data, but can you also talk more about the impact of automation? And you already mentioned it, the buzzword AI in RegOps.
Yeah.
From what you are seeing, do you have like more specific data on that too?
Yeah, I think we might have one more slide that's like really, really detailed, but actually people like this slide. So let me try to simplify it for the audience. That this is a classic common regulatory process. So on the left is kind of the different triggers that at the end of the day, do you need a submission or not? You have your reg strategy, you do your content planning, you put the submission together, it goes to the local affiliate, the health authority, all the interactions with the health authority, updating, all the different data. So I'm sure all the experts that are on this, this is just classic regulatory process. I'm not going to read this off, but on the box on the bottom are 12 use cases we tested, and we had design sessions like, hey, what's everybody working on? So really, the goal here is there is a lot of discussion on this, but who is doing what? So if we look, I'm only going to look at in that blue box number 1, 2, and 6. So automating document creation, generative AI for regulatory documents. So it says 45%. So 45% are actually actively working on this. So it's work in progress. From we're in a proof of concept, or we're engaging the vendors, or maybe even implementation. But this is where the size of a company makes a dramatic difference. Our colleagues in the large multinationals, 84%, almost all of them are working on this use case. And even the next one, the Gen AI, for a lot of them, or almost all of them, Gen AI for the CSR, the clinical study report, or even the protocol. So that figure there says 45%, but 91%, I think, is all except one, are actively working on that. The other one that is actually one of my favorite, and there's been a lot of work on some of these niche providers, but the general software providers too, is number 6. It's not only the intake and the automation of the intake of the health authority correspondence, but it's the mining of that consistency of question. And again, 40% of the world's working on it, but when we just say, let's look at the large or mid-tier companies, it's 88%. So really what the status is, and we really like the Gartner, whatever, the hype curve. Us and Gartner, we compare notes, kind of now and then. And I think with the AI, it's fitting the hype cycle. There's a tremendous amount of discussion, and we see it also in the data, because we had a question around, well, if you went into a proof of concept with AI and it didn't go into production, what can we learn from that? And there's a lot of classical stuff from that, as far as is the return on an investment there? Hey, we didn't realize we have some data quality issues, or consistency of process for the repeatability. So although there's a lot of hype and you would think everybody's working on it and implementing, there's a very few implementations. So we're really in that massive learning stage, and to flatten the hype curve is, what is the practicality of AI? Now, we've been tracking the baskets of advanced technology, and a lot of times we have the shiny object, we have structured content authoring. Remember robotic process automation, RPA? That was the big thing 4 years ago. So we have periods of time where there's hype, but what's the practical implications on that? So there's one thing, Greg Brolin and I, that tend to work on this section, that's very, very clear to us. There's different types with different technology, they come and go, but it's more the generative AI, which we believe is getting very interesting. And there's no thing, when we look at the large multinationals, they're all attacking this. The mid-tier, maybe 50%, and the small and very small barely maybe 20 or 30%, because that's let the larger companies figure this out, and if it works, it's going to cascade very quickly. But we have a lot of attention. There's a lot of niche providers that are out there. They're just popping up all over the place on the generative AI for medical writing, and the concept of content reuse, which is the structured content authoring, structured content management, whatever we're looking at, has been worked for over 10 or 15 years with not a lot of implementations. We're seeing the accuracy is not there yet, but we believe in the next coming a couple of years, the generative AI, you're going to start seeing workflows in systems that, okay, instead of pulling the template for the CSR, the medical writer is going to get version 1 of the CSR because the accuracy is going to be there. So it's going to be slower adoption than I think if you read in the press. But we're really kind of big on the generative AI, and just kind of heads up, we haven't publicly announced this, but I guess I'm doing it right now, that one of our, through our membership, our members want us to really focus on the generative AI, not only for industry, we kind of know what everybody's doing, but from the provider field. So we're going to be doing that research this fall, and should have a report out by the RSIDM show in February. But it's exciting time, and there's a lot of hype. There is a lot of experimentation. And when we track some of the technology, the RPA, there's less investment in it. There's less investment in like collaborative submissions, but the big three are master data management, generative AI, and interesting, the data hubs, data lakes, we call them data aggregation platforms. So you have some things that are very operational that have been building, and actually the spend for the data hubs is going to be higher than the AI. So we could talk about this all day. I mean, it's an open-ended question, but things are transitioning. Some things will work, some things won't, and I've kind of highlighted where we think things will be going.
So, and hey, Steve, I wanted to add a couple of things to that. If you look at that last slide there, in the middle, actually all use cases 1 to 12 are in that middle part of this process flow, which is where RegOps is heavily, working, right? So that's a telltale sign around how will the RegOps team or function evolve, right? Everyone can draw their own conclusions based on what we've said today. But coming back to the automation and Gen AI, I think there's 2 things that I would like to emphasize. And one is it can be seen as a hype, right? Everything's AI, everything's automation, and it's really important for teams to think about process maturity when they're thinking about automation. Never jump to automation if your process is not mature enough, because you won't identify the right places that you want to automate. Not decision making can't be automated, for example. That has to be done in a cross-functional format for your products as a regulatory and cross-functional team. And I think the other thing to think about is often regulation will drive automation, use of automation. For example, the EU CTR regulation needs redaction, company confidential information and patient information. So thinking about the rules that the team wants to set on how to redact documents, that's going to still be important conversation to have before you're able to hit the button and say, right, automate my redaction now based on these rules that we've set up for this product at this phase of development. So, don't underestimate the pre-work that needs to be done for automation, and that is process maturity and setting the rules. So that's what I wanted to add there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Priya. We did have a few audacious people that came up with questions, and maybe we can try to address them. Phoebe raised a question on, and I'm reading it here from my phone, do you see an evolution of the publisher's role into XEV MPD and upcoming IDMP submission managers, or what are the trends there? And then subsequent question, are these submissions EVMPD, EAF portals, IDMP done by publishers or IT or PV staff?
Yes. So I could take that, Steve.
All right.
Thank you.
Definitely, I'm seeing the evolution. I've worked with teams directly where actually, the publisher's role is to do that submission through the portal, right? So right now they're largely submitting documents through a health authority portal, and so indeed they would be involved in submitting the data related submissions through the portal, so XEVMPD, EAF, any of those items that are mentioned that are data submissions. And indeed there's going to be a need to have keen eye for detail and things like that. So I hope that I've answered the question, but I definitely see an evolution of the publisher's role there in industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add on there is just, with some of the automation, with the really basic stuff, hyperlinkings and other stuff, hey, do we need kind of less publishers? For companies that outsource, does it change the outsourcing, kind of calculus about maybe we bring things back in-house because of the automation? It's actually more cost effective. But from a role standpoint, kind of what is the career path? Usually the next step is the dossier manager, and there's more need for that globally. So, we see more and more companies trying to mature and have that career path for the publisher to the dossier manager.
Indeed.
Thank you both. Another question from James, and maybe directed to Steve. Can you talk more about what you're seeing with respect to driving decisions from enhanced regulatory intelligence?
Yeah, that's a classic one. Hi, Jim. He actually is in the same county that I live in, so kind of good to see you there. That's really a kind of a tough question, because we know that the regulatory intelligence capability for almost all companies is still trying to mature. It's getting that local knowledge that a lot of times is in people's heads, coupled with, more of the enterprise. So as we talk about potential automation of regulatory pathways, it's just not there. We've been a very big proponent of trying to push the dial on, applying technology and different types of capabilities, to enhance the use of regulatory intelligence. And this is where I think AI, and this is just stuff probably I've thought about, Jim, before the last time we talked, maybe about a month ago, that one of the criteria we believe, or it's just maybe I believe, is with all these mom and pop shops that are coming up with generative AI, is we believe the ones that will dominate. We're so focused on documents to data, but it kind of was an aha moment. It is those companies, technology companies, that can interrogate the content very successfully are going to be the ones that are going to win on the Gen AI. And I think that has big implications for regulatory intelligence, that if the interrogation can be better and all the the guidelines and all that, so then our Reg Intel experts can put the final push on that, we're going to finally see some movement on the regulatory intelligence. It's such a complex issue. It's so resource intensive, especially for the larger companies, and everybody's like, there has to be a better way, and it's not buying a Reg Intel database, which like two common ones. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing some early stages of some of the companies. I was on site a week ago, getting a demo about the interrogation of the content and having a higher success rate. Big implications on the positive side for Reg Intel.
All right, thank you very much, Steve and Priya, for those responses. In the interest of time, there's a couple more questions that came in, but we're going to try to address those at the later stage. I'd like to wrap it up here. First of all, thanking Steve and Priya for their highly valued contribution. A couple of practical things. This live event has been recorded, and it will be available on LinkedIn, where you can find it in the community called Accelerating ECTD Submissions. Just look it up on LinkedIn, Accelerating ECTD Submissions, and you will find it there. For our customers that have joined this session, please, I'd like to bring to your attention again that we're holding our customer meeting in Paris. Not only the Olympics are taking place in Paris this year, but also the DocShifter customer meeting is taking place in Paris. So please make sure to talk to us about that. And then over to Steve on a brilliant initiative we believe he has launched on a podcast, but I'm going to turn that over to Steve.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So for those, and we're really big on LinkedIn too. So a lot of times you might see this image. It's actually a little video that we've been doing podcasts for over a year and a half, and a lot of it is different subject matter experts, either on our team or other colleagues, to go through on kind of some of the topics of the day. We do have a series on our latest World Class RIM where each author of a section goes through. So you can get the story of what we're learning in each chapter of the World Class RIM survey. But what we just announced, and actually Olivier Paris, the founder and CEO of EndNove, was first up on our executive series. So there are one-on-one conversations with myself and other CEOs that are really, really important to the regulatory sector. So had a wonderful conversation with Olivier Paris. You can go look at the Gens and Associates podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, or just go to our website on Knowledge to Share, and you'll see our podcast page. We have probably about 25 podcasts out there. We're going to have a lot more on the executive series, but if you want to hear directly the conversation I had with Olivier, just please download it and enjoy. So back to you, Kurt.
Again, this concludes the session. Thank you very much for joining or rejoining, because all of you are rejoiners after our technical glitch on our first try for this session. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Priya. Stay tuned for the next LinkedIn Live, which will only be a few weeks or 6 weeks away. So thank you very much for joining. Have a fantastic rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care. Bye-bye.